well, let's go ahead into that case. Let me just for the benefit of our viewers here, this is some of the recent coverage in the New York Times. You will also find articles in Politico and Washington Post and other outlets. And the basic fact pattern here is, in some respect, quite parallel to your 2016 scenario. You've got someone concerned about what superiors are doing. They report it, and they experience consequences that may not be so black and white, but appear to be very much, retaliation. And so I wonder, Wes, if you can kind of walk us through a little bit of the story of Colonel Earl Matthews and how he finds himself in the news now.
Yes. Yeah, from the report, and I read his whole, well, not his whole, but most of the 36-page whistleblower reprisal report that he made as well. But it all came down to a phone call from the Capitol Police as well as some Washington officials on January 6th as the event, the insurrection or the riots were unfolding, where the Capitol Police were requesting National Guard assistance. And basically, at the time, General Pyatt, who's the director of the Army staff, and then General Charles Flynn, who's the deputy chief of staff for operations at Army headquarters, both kind of really gave pushback and mentioned that, the optics of deploying military would have been bad. And they also stated that the National Guard wasn't trained and ready for this response. Both of which Colonel Matthews has pushed back on and said, for one, there was a whole contingent of, I think, 150 National Guardsmen that had been trained and ready for this exact scenario that were ready to go.
Okay.
And then two, once Colonel Matthews stated that there was all this talk and pushback about optics, General Pyatt and General Flynn both denied that in response.
Okay. And
denied any of that in their reports to the committee or Congress. And so they basically put the onus on the National Guard. Hey, National Guard wasn't ready to go, and absolved themselves of responsibility.
Okay, so we've got a situation where Generals Pyatt and Flynn are the mouthpieces for the official record currently in the military, which finds that it wasn't a decision made by command to wait, but there were other factors and not an active decision to kind of hold off deploying the National Guard. And Colonel Matthews was present on that phone call, and he heard otherwise. And so he decided to go ahead and report that to Congress. And I wonder if you can help us understand why he chose to write to Congress rather than the IG.
Well, he submitted a memo to the January 6th committee.
Okay.
From what the report states. And I think really it's because, well, these guys were some of the most senior commanders in the entire Army.
Okay.
And so that's where it needed to go.
Because Congress was actively involved in making sense of the facts, and the distortion of record seemed to Colonel Matthews to be incredibly important. And based on the language he used in the report, he was really upset by this. And I wonder if you can help us understand why you think Colonel Matthews was so upset, and what do you think about the way he wrote that report?
Yeah, he probably, for his own legitimacy, and because I've had similar situations at a smaller scale, he probably should have kept the emotion out of the report.
Okay.
Would have been better for him, for sure.
Yep.
But I can see it as well, because, there has been for all of us, probably especially for him at that time frame, a lot of emotion in relation relation to January
Yeah.
6th and that whole event. Um, so what was the second part of the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, well, no, I think you answered both questions. One was why you can kind of understand why he used such invective in his
Mhm.
report, but you would have advised him to consider kind of keeping to the facts
Mhm.
in order to I guess make himself perhaps more sympathetic. But what do you what are the pros and cons of actually showing how you feel in such a report?
Um, well, I mean, I honestly don't think there are any pros. I think he could
Yeah.
have, just from past experience, both in
Yep.
the military and
Yep.
in the corporate world, so to speak.
Yeah.
Anytime someone has a complaint and they inject emotion into it, it's
Yeah.
a lot of that is often just disregarded.
Got it.
This person's just angry and clearly overcome with emotion about this event. So
Yep.
um, they're not thinking clearly, even if people don't consciously process that. But then especially it's easy for senior officers to say, look, here we've got this colonel writing this emotional report. Like he should have been a lot more professional about it. It's easy for them to make those arguments and discredit Colonel Matthews.
And moreover, I guess just following your thought, Wes, if the report that you write is kind of overcome with visible emotion, I guess I have the worry as a teacher of business ethics and concerned with my students. Did he do the due diligence that he needed to do, and did he get the advice that he should have gotten just to protect himself? And the fact that his report came out that way suggests that maybe he didn't get all of the feedback and process it as fully as he might have.
Yeah, I agree. Following the reprisals that he experienced,
Yep.
which were importantly based on the fact that when he submitted to the committee,
Yep.
someone there or a staffer released this.
I
So he
see.
didn't release it out to the media, and I think that's an important point.
Okay.
He was trying to stick to proper internal processes,
Interesting.
not make it a big media explosion.
Yep.
But he was then really blamed. Part of his reprisal was being blamed for that. That
Yes.
his communications got out. Um,
So one point is always assume that anything you write could end up on in the New York Times. That's the saying,
yeah,
and unfortunately
yeah,
for Colonel Matthews, that's exactly what happened. And that facet of his case was not helpful to him.
yeah. And I really think that to answer that second part of your question, he ended up going to this organization, Whistleblower Aid, um,
Okay.
after the reprisals and getting, attorneys helping him out. And hindsight, he probably thinks the same thing. He maybe should have done that initially.
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, students watching this will have read the tips from the Olympus CEO about what steps to follow, and clearly one of them is to do your due diligence, make sure you understand the law and protections, beyond also just making sure you're prepared for the potential consequences of what may
Yeah.
follow. And for Colonel Matthews, the main consequence seems to be that I guess in a way, like you anticipated a meaningful promotion coming to you, and Colonel Matthews expected to be appointed a one-star general, as I understand,
Hmm.
and that has not happened.
Yeah, exactly. And
Um,
yeah, and there were he lays out other instances that were clear reprisal, whether it be just, things he experienced interpersonally,
yep.
or others.
Could you share some of those anecdotes that stuck with you from his report, just to paint the picture a little for students?
Yeah, he was directly accused of unprofessional behavior by, like I said, um, putting these communications out into the media, which he didn't do, of
Yeah,
course.
right.
Um, there was something about him. there was a conference in Virginia being attended by General Piatt or Piatt, I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
And he was listed as a person of concern and escorted out.
Oh man.
Which of course looks really bad for a colonel. And then, of course, being denied consideration for promotion, despite having been selected by the promotion board. Kind of similar, but in a much larger, more important sense of what I went through, where,
Yeah.
I was being told, hey, you will get promoted to E8, and then that all just completely fell away.
Yeah.
And there was no interest.
Right. So yeah, there's a strong message that if you make your chain of command look bad, you're not moving up that chain of command.
Yep. One I read in the report where one senior officer above him stated that his, quote, widely publicized attacks on Army senior leaders meant that he should be removed from his position as well. So he was hearing this kind of rhetoric, like directly from leadership at the time at the Army War College.
Yeah, so whichever direction his career takes, it's not going to be smooth sailing if he stays in the military.
No, really, even if he gets this promotion.
Yeah. It's going to be with him the rest of his career.
Yeah, unless and until he gets far away from anyone involved in this. But the Army's not that big, and especially when you start making general, they all know each other, and
they all know each other.
All the senior officers, they know or know of each other.
Yeah. Thank you for painting the picture here, Wes. I mean, reflecting on Colonel Matthews' experience and your own experience, what thoughts do you have about making the whistleblowing process, effective? Clearly, it's a very different setup, reporting to Congress versus reporting to the IG. But what lessons do you see from these cases about the purpose of a whistleblowing process and what it takes to make it effective?
Yeah. Well, the purpose of the whistleblowing process is to be able to have an apparatus available to someone to report what they see as either injustice or illegalities being conducted in whatever institution they're a part of, without reprisal, even if their allegations end up being false, if they're false about what they perceive, or they're wrong about what they perceive.
Yeah.
Unless they are, of course, deliberately trying to lie about someone to get them in trouble. And so the process doesn't work, or doesn't work as well, when those communications are not kept confidential, really.
Right.
From those that you're charging against. And in this case, someone released it all because they thought that, obviously it was of public interest.
Yes.
But that didn't help his case or his situation in the least. Maybe helped his case because it seems like it got, the attention of the Biden White House.
Yep.
But definitely didn't help his situation.
So indeed, it seems like the person who leaked this report took it upon themselves to act a little more like actually Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning, and kind of revealing something to the public outside of any whistleblowing process. Probably based on some personal motivation about what they thought should happen, but without the checks and balances of a structured whistleblowing process.
Yeah, and there really needs to be a separated outside entity that's involved in analyzing the whistleblowing. In this case, the January 6th committee, and in the case of his reprisal report, he went to the Pentagon IG. In my case, in the last scenario, obviously that it wasn't separated enough. And even in the case of the committee, like you pointed out, even though that was separated and that could have worked properly, someone released all that communication. And so now there's really almost no separation, essentially.
No separation at all. Good. Well, thank you very much for helping us make sense of that case, Wes. I guess my last question for you is, speaking to professionals who are bound to run into issues in their own organizations, what would be your word of advice or parting thought in order to be able to process these situations in a way that is effective for the organization, but also protects themselves?
Man, that's a good question, because I have noticed a big difference between being in the military and then being out in the corporate world, even in defense, which is um, essentially veteran friendly for the most part. Is that, yes, while the military will, as a whole, kind of protect itself, you have just more protections as a military member in general.
Mm-hmm.
You have more avenues to fall back on, and
Yep.
people and entities that are there to help you in these cases and to advocate for you, at the very least. In the corporate world, that business is going to protect itself at all costs.
Right.
So if you're going to make a complaint in the corporate environment, and even if it's very important, validated, if it's in defense and it's regarding maybe a classified defense program, and like, you've got to make these reports. I'd say, to be a realist, be ready to just leave that company.
Okay.
Because even if you stay, it's probably not going to continue well for you.
Okay.
And we can look at, I was looking at a few of these defense whistleblowing cases, and you
Yes.
can see that, through and through in all those cases when you read about them.
So in a
That's
way,
a little too cynical, but
well, so the decision to put yourself out there as a whistleblower, if you're not at the place where the fact that you've seen this means you don't want to work there anymore, then try to exhaust all avenues for making change internally that goes with the grain a little more than
yeah,
a whistleblowing complaint.
yeah. And I'd say weigh the ethical, moral, and legal considerations, like, how bad is this? Is this
Yeah.
bad enough where I need to make this stand, even at
Yes.
risk of my job? Which of course affects all of us personally, affects our families.
Yes.
I
Good.
tend to lean toward the latter. Like, I'm going to take the stand. I don't care what happens. It's maybe not always the best decision, but
Yeah, I can relate to you. But people, like, as you say, people are all over the map on this spectrum of how light a trigger we have to be willing to put ourselves out there. I guess the thing that's really interesting to me to reflect on is that in the military, the strength of the bureaucracy can offer a lot of protections. Of course, when they don't work, the consequences might be even worse.
yeah, no, exactly.
But when it works, you have a lot more protection. So it's stressful in a different way than the corporation.
No, that's a really good point, when they don't work. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Wes. It's really valuable to get your inside perspective on these issues, and I really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having me. This was a great discussion.
Cheers. So we actually kept talking after the interview, and there's an important postscript that actually I think brings a lot of hope to humanity. So, Wes, going back to that 2016 IG report, you want to follow up and tell us kind of what happened after you retired?
Yeah, and to recap, basically, I tried to get that commander fired for what I saw as negligence during a deployment. So of course, we didn't have a good relationship from then on until I retired in 2018. Well, then in 2019, my co-author, Major General Petard, and I released the book Hunting the Caliphate, and I actually got a message from that old commander. He was then stationed at the Pentagon, and we started kind of talking back and forth, and he, in the end, ended up apologizing about how things went during that deployment and following. And, and I kind of said the same thing, like, hey, maybe I responded to certain things the wrong way. Like I said, with emotion, a little too much anger. Maybe we could have worked things out on that deployment without it going there. And it was a great it was a great full circle moment. And at the time, he was actually trying to get me to the Pentagon to present to some of the staff on our book, Hunting the Caliphate, as we covered a lot of the history of forming the strike campaign against ISIS.
Yeah.
So, that was a kind of happy ending story in a way, because like I said, that moment was one of the catalysts that led me to decide, all right, I'm not going to stay in anymore in the military. This is getting to be too much on me.
Yeah.
I'm retiring right at my 20-year mark instead of pushing on. And I don't have any regrets there.
Right.
Had a great career, but that was
Yeah, but it changes the feeling of your experience, of how you finished, to have that human connection restored.
yep. Yeah, and in the end, the process worked. It wasn't an IG process that worked. It was a human process that worked.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's very powerful, and a good reminder to all of us, that finding the space to be vulnerable and apologize and connect and tell people what's difficult in your organization can be extremely redemptive.
yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Well, nice postscript, Wes. Let's close it again here.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.